Welcome to Friends with Fertility, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of fertility, reproductive health, and all the emotional journeys that are in between. I'm your host, Elizabeth King, a fertility expert dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, support, and inspiration you need on your path to parenthood. Whether you're just starting out, exploring your options, or looking for solidarity and advice, we are here for you. Let's embark on this journey together and turn uncertainty into empowerment and make friends with fertility. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to Friends with Fertility. Today we have Joanna Jewell. Welcome, Joanna.
Hi, thank you for having me.
For our audience listening today, can you let us know your story and how it relates to fertility and how you got into it?
Sure. So I actually started in tech startups and then moved to medical companies working in med tech and in mostly patient experience. Fertility patients have been, I would say, maybe 10% of patients that I have encountered all throughout my journey, all till I have started working for IVF Media, where it's 100% of people I speak to.
Amazing. That's our people that we're talking to right now. So it's perfect. Tell us about the patient experience team. What does that mean? Because that's not really a term that's widely talked about here in the States. So what does that even mean for people who are listening?
So basically, I think it is quite brand new everywhere. It's started with the more focus on customer experience and customer experience becoming a kind of it subject everywhere in bigger companies. And the good thing that came out of it is also focus on patient experience. So an area that has been maybe ignored a bit. It wasn't being paid as much attention in the past as it should in a lot of areas of healthcare. And what we do as a patient experience team, we focus on the experience of fertility patients. So we don't only focus on assisting people in their journeys, but we also make sure to carry their feedback and change the industry, change the journeys of the future patients as well, taking into the account everything that we learn every day with every single patient we speak to, and have that impact the journeys in the future.
Which is so nice to hear because so often we give feedback and we're like, does this land anywhere? Is anyone listening to this? And will this ever affect change on anything? So it's nice to hear that you guys are actually taking that feedback in and affecting change as it happens. So can you tell us about how the patient journey is different when someone is seeking treatment outside of their home country?
Sure. So it is fertility journey as is very difficult, very vulnerable. And in terms of looking abroad, you are faced with so many more decisions. You have to decide to kind of go outside of your comfort zone, to be faced with a foreign language, be faced with a different culture, with a different city, possibly a country that you've never been to. So there is additional layer of decisions that people are faced with. And what we do, we try to help make it easier, educate, and possibly help narrow down the choices. So help them choose a country, help them choose a clinic, based on everything that the couple or a woman have went through in their journey so far.
And do you see a big difference with cost across different countries and areas? I say that with a caveat that cost, of course, depends on everybody's individual situation specifically. So I want to, put that with an asterisk. But generally speaking, we know typically in the US, it's X. So in Europe and places that you guys help people with their journey, do you see a big difference between country to country?
Between country to country, I would say it's medium. I believe on average, Europe is more affordable than the US.
Why do you
Between
think that
countries,
is?
Um, I think it's mainly down to cost of living in many countries in Europe. Cost of living being lower caused the medical treatments to be potentially more affordable. Therefore, also often the popularity of medical tourism into Europe from the US, Canada. Um, and there are a lot of places in Europe that the treatments can be more affordable than people's home country. But it does also vary. The prices um, can be portrayed differently depending on the country. Different things can be included, whether it's medication, add-ons. So it's always good to analyze what is different country offering you, and of course you need to take into the account the flights, the accommodation. It all adds up, and it is worth considering when you're comparing, for example, your home country to the country you're traveling to.
I think that's such an obvious statement to make, but yet people don't take that into consideration when they're just looking at the price tag of what it says on the clinic, because there's so much more than that, right? How much is the transportation from the airport to the hotel, from the hotel to the clinic, et cetera, et cetera. And on an every other day basis, or however long it is that you're staying there, there's a lot of small nuances that go into play when you're figuring out your overall budget to decide what's right for you. So, why do you think patient advocacy is so important in fertility treatment, and what does that look like in your practice?
Um, we have spoken to multiple patients, and what we have realized is that there are some difficult experiences that people have faced. And that can be down to um, the clinic not being aware of how to approach such a difficult subject, or it can be down to communication, or mismatched expectations. It could be a variety of reasons. And patient advocacy, we try to advocate for our patients as much as we can, whether it's through educating clinics or whether it's to help through helping people communicate with their clinic. But we also teach patients how to advocate for themselves, how to set up healthy boundaries, how to clearly set up expectations with the doctor, the clinic that they're speaking with. So I guess it goes, both ways. We can only do this much. But we also want the patient to feel like they're in control in this situation.
And what do you think the biggest disconnect is between the clinic and the patient?
Um, I think often it's down to for patient, this is probably one of the more difficult situations they will be in, the more memorable moments in their life. For clinic, it is one of the hundreds of patients that they will have, sometimes thousands, and it doesn't have to come from a bad place, but the clinic simply may overlook some things. Some things may be obvious for them, um, and it the more experience you have, sometimes you may lose that individuality and the individual approach towards your patients, and trying to see what works for different groups of people. I think that's the biggest struggle that we're seeing, that clinics, personnel with great intentions sometimes just doesn't really get it right with some of their patient base. And
Yeah, I see that often as well. And
Mm.
unfortunately, it's such an emotional tie for the patient, right? They take it so personally that they don't
Yeah.
remember the last appointment, or they don't remember something that they called in about. And I understand that, but I also see from the perspective of what you're saying with the clinic, there's so much going on. And I think maintaining that, I've seen clinics that have grown just too fast for their own good, that they really truly are over their head and they have too much going on. But also, I think keeping the patients' expectations to know, like, hey, we have a lot going on. We're doing the best we can to keep you there, but when we are in front of you, we'll be present with you in that moment. I think that is really common. What are the most common misconceptions you think that the people have about doing IVF abroad?
Mm, I think the most common one is that you are compromising on quality if you're going
Hmm.
abroad. Um, and it can be due to multiple reasons, but I believe that that's definitely not true. Of course, depending where you go, there are always going to be great clinics, and there are always going to be not so great clinics. So it all depends on how well you do your research, and what option you will choose out of all of those presented to you. But just because you're choosing to go abroad, it does not mean that it will affect your success rate or that it will affect your outcome.
Is there any way to truly know the success rates of the international clinics? Like, is there a database that has those statistics, so people can know success rates, treatment costs, et cetera?
So we try to, on our websites, we try to show as much information as we can about roughly what you would be looking at. But in terms of exact success rates, it is a very difficult subject because every clinic can and is free to measure it as they wish. So having those numbers be comparable is near impossible. So what we always recommend patients is when they speak to a clinic, to ask for their personal success rate. What does the clinic, the doctor that they're speaking to, predicts in their situation? And that will give you the best comparable data in terms of success rates. In terms of costs or other factors, it is much easier to compare, but success rates are tricky.
Again, even with the cost, I think it's a little bit tricky because you don't know everybody's specific situation. And
Yeah, true.
everybody can have small differences that can actually add up to be a big cost difference. And so that is unusual as well. And I feel like with the success rates, it can sometimes be misleading also because if they have, 20 live births, was that to people that are under 30? Like, what are the very details that might relate back to you that can be relevant for you to make your decision? And I think that that's where you need to ask specifically of what is their experience with people over 35, or what is their experience with endometriosis, or how often do they deal with these sorts of things, I think are good questions to ask, because if you're just purely looking at statistics, it's really hard to tell because we don't know everybody's specific details of, we're not comparing apples to apples, right? It could be very different of what that looks like.
That's exactly right. And, sometimes, as you mentioned, with the live births, or even going the other way around, if you have a clinic with lower success rates, that can be due to them taking more difficult cases as well. And if a clinic rejects more difficult cases, they may have higher success rates. So it's really tricky to compare these numbers.
Hmm. And I think that's where it goes back to using your intuition and knowing that this doctor feels good for me, and your like gut feeling on that, because there are quite a few. It's less common now, I feel, than it has in years past, but them keeping their success rates high by saying, we're not going to accept you because you don't meet these criteria. Well, those people are becoming bigger, outnumbering, that if they're turning around all the people over 35 or all the people over 40, they're missing a big part of the population that still needs help with their fertility. So really have those conversations that are direct if you're struggling to find somebody that will accept you because of one thing or the other. What factors should someone consider when trying to choose the right clinic to fit their needs?
Um, So basically, there is quite a lot that I believe that should go into that decision. But one that is often overlooked, and you mentioned, is intuition. And I believe that it almost feels wrong in this process to use intuition. It feels at times that you should be using only the statistics or the data in this process. So, of course, to choose a good clinic, you should do your research. You should, check the financial side, check whether the treatment you're looking for is available. But in the end, you also need to feel comfortable with their team. You need to feel comfortable with a doctor, especially if you're going abroad. That relationship that you will have with the doctor, with the team, is going to be crucial, because stress can be such a negative factor in this process, that how you'll feel there is going to matter so much.
You're that is my number one thing, is how does your body feel and the frequency of your body feel when you're in that place and that location? Are you stressed when you're there? Are you overly tired? Is your body fatigued? And when I say tired versus fatigued, most people know that there's a difference in that. And really leaning into, as much as I would love to do it here because it's cheaper, it just doesn't feel good for me for some reason. And listen to your body with that. So I appreciate you saying that. And how do you support patients in making the informed decisions without becoming overwhelmed with too much information or conflicting advice? Because I think, again, you can get multiple opinions and everybody can have a different opinion. And then you're even more confused and overwhelmed with how to make a decision.
It is really difficult, and this process is overwhelming. We have to admit that it is overwhelming, especially for people who are going through it for the first time. We try our best to check in with patients throughout their journey to make sure that they don't feel overwhelmed, that we are not giving them too much information at the time, that they are ready for every step of the way. Um, but they also need to feel comfortable saying that to the clinic, to the doctor, that if they do get overwhelmed, that it's okay to say, I'm sorry, this is a lot, could we have another consultation? Or I'm sorry, I'm not going to remember anything, I am too stressed, overwhelmed, could you please send me a follow-up after this?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's okay, and we're just people, and this process takes a lot. In terms of conflicting information, so we usually advise people to speak to 3-4 clinics maximum if they are happy with one of the choices in those 3 and 4. Of course, if not, we continue looking. But if you're speaking to 3 or 4 clinics, and every single provides you with a protocol that is different, provides you with a different approach, you're just going down that path where you are going to struggle to make a decision, because
Mm-hmm.
it isn't the clinics may not vary that much between each other, but the approaches will. And you're just making you don't have all the information you need to make a medical choice. You just have to trust somebody. And as we already talked about, intuition here plays a big part, but you also need to know where you have to say yes, or where you make that choice to kind of draw that line, because you can keep researching forever as well.
Right. Get into that analysis paralysis state where you're just stuck because you have too much information. And in
Exactly.
this journey, we don't have time to be stuck. We need to make a move. So can you share a story of an example when your team made a significant difference in somebody's fertility journey?
Mm, I like to think that we try to do it every day, but the first thing that comes to my mind is we anytime we are unable to help, but we're able to just listen to somebody's story, means so much to me, because it shows that despite the fact that we may not have options for this particular case, this particular person, but at times all they need is to be listened to. Their journey may have lasted years, they and sometimes at the end of the 1 hour, 2 hour call, we hear that, thank you for finally listening, and like, thank you for, I really appreciate having somebody to finally listen to my story. And it just means so much to us, because we help in fertility journeys every day, but giving somebody that, just that little bit, that least we can do, and it sometimes means we cry with them, sometimes means we smile with them, but just that holding their hand during the process, it just means the world.
I could imagine that it would. What are some examples of a candidate that would not be a good fit for you guys? Like you mentioned,
Um,
if they're not able to move forward.
the biggest limitation for us is whatever's down to legislations in countries. So the most common one is age. Most countries in Europe, the age limit is up to 54, 55 for IVF treatments. So that is our biggest limitation.
And is that with or without their own embryos? Like, is that going through the whole process of egg retrieval at 54?
And no, that's using donor oocytes.
Okay. Um, and I think that that's pretty understandable at that point. I think most people at that age are understanding. Do you come across people that are 55 and thinking, this just isn't right, that this is happening still?
Um, yes, we do, and there are different situations in people's lives that we do have couple of patients a month that come to us at the age of 56, 57, 58,
Mm,
where either they have went through multiple failed treatments and are still looking for that last chance, or that they just their life went in such way that they couldn't do it before, and it is heartbreaking, and we never turn them down without a conversation, because that's, again, least we can do is maybe we'll be able to point them to a direction. Maybe we'll
hmm.
be able, there's always that hope in us that maybe we're able to do something.
Right.
um but yeah, sometimes all we can do is listen.
That's understood. So you're so passionate about inclusivity and neurodiversity. How do those values show up with the work that you do with the patients?
We analyze clinics in terms of how comfortable and safe we believe they are for LGBTQ plus couples or people,
And
and
how do you define that? How is that defined?
it is it varies very much by country, but it goes from what the clinic communicates through what we can hear on social media from patients, what we have heard in the past from feedback from patients who have experienced the clinic as a, for example, same sex couple or a trans person. So we try to gather all of that and base our decisions in terms of suggesting a clinic for a patient on that. But in the future, we also hope to include accessibility in that, include how friendly a clinic may be to a person who is neurodivergent. And that includes whether the team went through a training or whether they're aware how to accommodate people with certain needs. And it's just fertility world, I believe, is still lacking a little bit there, and we do try. That information isn't available online. You cannot really find out whether a clinic is going to be neurodivergency friendly. So what we can try to do is research it in our own terms and be able to provide everybody with a solution.
Right. I feel that the industry itself is still fairly young and all of this is new. And so it's really a matter of paving the way as we go along and learning it as we go and giving grace to the areas where understanding that it is a learning process and everybody's just doing the best they can as we're forging through this new way of everything, really.
That's
So
true.
what advice would you give someone who feels nervous and unsure about seeking IVF abroad?
Mm, I would say try to find somebody to talk about this with. And it can be a person working in the IVF industry like us, or it can be a Facebook group. There is a lot of Facebook groups related to IVF abroad. You can exchange your experiences, questions. You can find a person who have went through a treatment in the clinic that you're considering, a country that you're considering. Getting that information from a kind of a third party, not necessarily from the clinic's website or just from the clinic's website, can help you get an actual vibe or a feeling of a clinic and
I
get you
agree.
a little bit more insight into how it's going to look like.
I feel like it's more personal when you can talk to somebody about it and get what their situation was and their experience, because it's tend to sink in a little bit more, and you can imagine yourself a little bit easier in that way. What's the one thing you wish more people understood about the international fertility experience?
That is a challenging journey. And
From
I
what
don't mean it.
perspective?
Um, it there is a lot of factors to consider, more than if you are going for a fertility treatment in your home country. That doesn't mean that it's not worth it, and it doesn't mean that it is going to be an awful experience or much worse experience than if you were going for fertility treatment in your home country. But for families of couples or people going through fertility treatments abroad, I think that additional support and additional level of understanding may be helpful. And similarly, for people who are considering it, um, knowing in advance that it will take a little bit more research, and there are things to consider, such as travel, and making yourself feel comfortable in that process somewhere else, is just worth knowing ahead of time.
I know a lot of people have the question about if they freeze embryos or eggs abroad, do they have to stay there forever? Is it possible to bring them back to their home country? How does that work?
Depends on the country where you freeze your eggs, and depends on the country that you want to transport them to. But often it is very much possible. It is very possible to move them within the same country. And in terms of moving them between countries, it just depends. But if you're thinking about it, you can always check whether a specific clinic will allow, or a specific country will allow you to move your material to your home country, and know that ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. How can listeners learn more about the work you do and contact you and get support from your team?
Um, you can check out any of our websites: fertilityroad.com, fertilityclinicsabroad.com, and eggdonationfriends.com. And there you can find information about countries, clinics, and additional educational materials that we have in terms of learning more about IVF abroad. And you can also find forms to contact us directly to get in touch with my team. And if there are people who need guidance or are looking to start a treatment abroad, we are there to help however we can.
Thank you so much. It sounds like there are so many resources available that you all provide for people, which I think is so helpful, because again, the world is getting smaller, which is great. And that means more options are available for people to choose from, which is also great, because I know oftentimes we are confined by regulations and things in different countries. So to just see what your different options are always great. The knowledge that you have is power. And when you feel empowered to make a better decision, you feel more confident in your decision. So thank you so much for your time today. And we look forward to connecting soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Friends with Fertility. We hope that you found the stories, insights, and tips as inspiring and informative as we did. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Your friends with fertility are here for you. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media for updates and more fertility resources. Until next time, stay hopeful and keep believing in your journey, and know that we are sending you lots of love.